What's up, everyone? I am Sweet JP. This is Sweet Japanese, and today we're going to be talking about pronouns in the Japanese language, specifically first-person pronouns. So things that refer to I, me, or myself.
私
ん
僕俺
Before we start, you might be asking, you're just some white guy. What are your credentials to teach Japanese? And for that, I have a very simple answer. All right. So with that question answered, there's one more thing that I want to clarify before we get into the pronouns themselves, and that is the terminology that I'm going to be using to describe the vocabulary. So if I say something like feminine or masculine, or something that is typically used by girls versus something that is typically used by boys, what I mean is that is how the language is currently used, and it is not 100% prescriptive. These things do have variance in their uses. There are subcultures which use them differently than what you will hear in most cases, but I'm going to focus on how these words are generally used and what you are most likely to run into and what you will most commonly use yourself, depending on how you want to be perceived. So with that out of the way, let's get into our first pronoun, which is watashi. Watashi is by far the most common first-person pronoun you'll see as a beginner learning the Japanese language. Any textbook you read, watashi is the first thing you will see. It is polite, and it is gender neutral and age neutral. So basically anyone can say watashi in almost any situation, and it will be safe to use. No one will be upset with you. Nobody will think you're rude to them. So if you're a beginner with the Japanese language, the safest way to refer to yourself is just by saying watashi, or in some cases your own name. If I want to say I'm JP, I would say watashi wa JP desu. Something like that. Next up we have watakushi. Watakushi is similar to watashi, so much so that the kanji is the same. Obviously the reading is different. It is also polite, gender neutral, age neutral, except that it expresses a sort of respect towards the listener. It is elevating the listener above yourself. If I were talking to my boss, I would refer to myself as watakushi, because I'm putting myself at a lower level. I am humble with respect to this higher person. Or another example, if you're going to a hotel and the hotel clerk needs to refer to themselves, they might say watakushi to refer to themselves instead of watashi. If you're an English speaker, they'll probably just speak to you in English, but either way, watakushi is something to know, something you will hear once in a while, but not something that you will use often as a non-native speaker of Japanese. So this is where we get into the pronouns that do imply some sort of masculinity, femininity, some sort of age or style, which I think is super cool and like one of the most interesting parts of the language for me. English doesn't really have anything like that, so it's interesting to see it in Japanese. And the first example I want to talk about is boku. Boku is typically masculine and youthful, so it's most often used by younger boys. It's also not polite, so it's not something that you should use with someone you're not familiar with or already close to. So if you want to use boku as a way to refer to yourself, I would recommend using it with your friends and not with coworkers or something like that. Another interesting thing about boku is that you will see it a lot if you listen to J-pop or J-rock. And an example of that might sound something like this, or something like this. And those are just a few of many, many examples, so keep an ear out for boku next time you're listening to some J-pop. Next up we have ore, which is also masculine, more so than boku, and is typically used by older men, whereas boku was used by boys. Ore can kind of have an edge to it, It sounds maybe a little rough or a little crude depending on the situation. So again, this is not a polite pronoun. This is not something to use with a stranger or coworkers or in a customer service situation. This is something that should be used among friends. My baseline is if you're in a situation where you wouldn't say damn, like damn it, don't say ore, but that's just me. Last but not least, we have atashi, which is typically used by younger women. It's pretty feminine and it's also not polite and not formal. So again, just like boku, just like ore, use it with your friends or people you're familiar with. Don't use it in formal situations or with strangers. Some folks have said that atashi is not feminine, that atashi can be used by anyone, and I haven't typically seen that to be the case. So I have heard people say that, but in my experience, that's not how it's used. So that's just something else to be aware of. So that'll do it for the most common pronouns that are used in Japanese, but there is an additional case that you should be aware of. If you're an English speaker, this might seem weird to you, but it is something you will hear and see a lot. And that is that the subject of the sentence is often left out altogether. So in English, if I wanted to say, I like it, or I like you, whatever, I would have to say, I like whatever. But in Japanese, if the subject is already clear, you can just omit that. So if we know we're talking about me and I like something, I don't have to say, watashi wa suki desu, or like, ore wa suki desu. I could just say, suki desu. And it is clear based on context what I'm talking about. Again, if you're a native English speaker and you're not familiar with Japanese or any languages that leave out the subject like that, it can be weird to try to pick up what's being discussed from the context. But over time, it gets a lot easier and it actually saves a lot of time, which is super cool. So that'll do it for the most common first-person Japanese pronouns and their uses. There are also a bunch more less common ones, some older ones that aren't in use anymore, as well as second-person pronouns, way to refer to you, y'all, yins, stuff like that. If you want me to do a video on those, please let me know in the comments. If you do like what I'm doing, please hit the like button. Please subscribe, because I have a bunch of channels that I'm working on right now and a bunch of content that I'm working on right now, as well as my fitness Twitch stream, and I just have a limited amount of time and I'm trying to make the best content that I can. But until I know what people want me to focus on, I don't know what to do. So it really does mean a lot if you comment and if you subscribe, because then the numbers can tell me objectively what I should be working on. So please do that and let me know what I should do, and I will see you next time.